Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to cover some care tips for Nepenthes species. So this is to be treated as a general care guide, and obviously all of these things change based on your climate, your house environment, where you're growing them, and all of those things. But I'm creating this to give you kind of background info on the genus in general that may help you in your caring for them indoors, and also detail my experience in growing these species. So I have two Nepenthes in my collection. I've had them both for quite a while. I've definitely gone through it and struggled initially with care on these, but I've got them down to a pretty good routine right now and a good background understanding on these species. So a bit of background on Nepenthes in general, which really is key to caring for any type of plant. You want to know where they come from, where they thrive, and what is their native environment so that you can kind of emulate that when you're caring for them indoors. So Nepenthes have over 170 species in the genus, which is a lot, and they have a super broad range. In general, a lot of the species are native to China, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, but there are also species in Australia, Madagascar, Seychelles, India. The greatest diversity in this species range is thought to be in Borneo and Sumatra. So with Nepenthes, the key to knowing how to care for them is knowing what species you actually have, because they are typically either a lowland or a highland species, and this can tell you a lot about what the plant can tolerate. The lowland species like kind of warmer climates that don't have a big change in temperature between night and day. Whereas the highland species thrive when they have warm conditions during the day and then a temperature drop and a cool nighttime period. In general though, the habitats that they are found in provide super high humidity and very low nutrients. But again, it is also varied. You can find species in shaded forest habitats, but also in open grassland savanna type habitats. But wherever they're found, they're usually found in quite acidic and quite high humidity, low nutrient habitat types that have substrates of kind of peat, sandstone, or volcanic type of soils. A lot of these plants are also epiphytes, which means that they tend to grow on other plants or other structures, and some even have no contact with soil or substrate at all, kind of like your air plants. Like I said, because of the dramatic variation across this genus, it is really important to figure out what you have. Now this can be a bit difficult because a lot of the houseplant versions that we tend to grow are generally hybrids between different species, but just do your best, do your research online, look at other people's plants, click on different species and see what tends to look similar to yours. Now, in general, unless you are a real expert already at caring for these, which if you are, you're probably not watching this video, flowering can also really help you in identification, but in general, this doesn't really happen indoors unless you are providing something absolutely perfect. For context, if you don't know, I live in Ireland, and so our climate is quite humid naturally. We get a lot of rain. It's a very rainy, cloudy summer here in Ireland right now. And so this naturally provides a higher humidity, but obviously because of the colder temperatures, we might have heating on indoors as well, depending on the house that you live in, which can also reduce humidity. So in general, my conditions are good light in the summer. We have very long days in the summer. Sunrise can be 4 or 5 a.m. and sunset might not be until 11 or 11:30 at night. So we get long days, but we have a lot of cloudy days as well. Then on the contrast to that, in winter, we have very short days with sunrise being between 8 and 9 a.m. and sunset being as early as 3:30 or 4 p.m. So that variation kind of tells me that in general, the species I should be trying to grow here without artificial lighting and terrariums and all of that would be your highland species that are used to that kind of drop in temperatures and drop in light levels. So the species that I grow are two very common species in the houseplant market. So, you know, I don't know if I would be good at growing some of the more difficult types in this condition. As I said, this is just a kind of a general background video. So the two species that I have, one is called Nepenthes Bloody Mary. This is a very common hybrid between Nepenthes ventricosa and Nepenthes ampullaria. Nepenthes ventricosa is an easier highland species that is used to kind of temperature and humidity variations, whereas Nepenthes ampullaria is used frequently in hybrids because this is actually found in a range of different habitat types, so it's kind of an adaptable species. And it also has adapted its pitchers to not be carnivorous, but actually also feed on detritus matter or leaf litter. So this suggests kind of low to the ground situation. And I believe they're also known as detritivorous. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but basically they feed on detritus, which is very interesting. The other one that I have down as Nepenthes spa because I don't actually fully know what it is because of these hybrids. I'm not fully sure, but I suspect it's some type of Nepenthes mirabilis hybrid. This is very commonly also used in hybrids and is very common in the houseplant market. I got both of these plants in a typical garden center that wouldn't have really a lot of your rarer type of species. Nepenthes mirabilis has one of the widest distributions of all species, and so because of that, as I said, it's quite adaptable like ampullaria and is very easy to care for. Despite all of that, I will go through some of the things that I've learned about different aspects of their care. So we're going to cover light, soil, fertilizing, pruning, watering, humidity, and pests. As far as light goes, I grow both of my Nepenthes right in front of probably our biggest window in the house in this room. They're both hanging on the curtain rail and they've stayed there for a long time. One of these plants I also had in our previous house that was hanging also on a Velux window situation. So I've always grown them growing really close to a window in Ireland, which means that they probably get very high light compared to most of my plants. I do not grow these under any artificial light, which is interesting in my climate. So they do get great light in the summer, but it's not a south-facing window, it's an east-facing window. But they get quite low light levels then in winter. Now growth does slow in winter because of this, but it doesn't totally stop, and they grow quite prolific during the summer in my experience. So with these, I find that they enjoy high light in my situation, but because of where these species come from, they are adaptable. So they may not highlight in someone else's situation may be too much for them, but in my experience, compared to most of my houseplants, they like a lot of light and they do well with that. For the soil or the substrate, this is very, very important when caring for almost any carnivorous plant, and obviously Nepenthes is included in that. So I grow these in a mix of mostly coconut coir with a little bit of vermiculite. Now, when I repotted both of these at the beginning of the year, I did not have enough vermiculite or bark to add to this that I would have much preferred to add more, but I just did with what I have. So it's mostly a cocoa coir, cocoa peat mix, a peat-free mix. Now the reason this is good and what you must consider with any substrate for these plants is that it cannot have any nutrient or organic content in the substrate. So perlite, vermiculite, coconut coir and bark are all kind of inert, so they don't actually provide any nutrition to plants, which is why you wouldn't want to pot up your houseplants in something like this, because they'll be very nutrient deficient and will rely a lot on regular fertilization. But the reason these plants don't need this is because they grow in low nutrient environments. The reason carnivorous plants have evolved to eat insects and other animals is because they need to get their nutrients from elsewhere. If you are providing these plants with nutrients, there is absolutely no need for them to create pitchers. So it's another reason why, if you're having issues with your plant not creating any pitchers, this could be a reason why. Because they also like damp habitats, you want something that has good moisture retention, that holds on to water. Coconut coir does that really well. It does turn hydrophobic if it totally dries out, so I will never let it totally dry out with these two plants, because it can also wick water out of the roots then. Coconut coir or cocoa peat mixes naturally result in a buildup of salts and also a low pH, so quite an acidic environment, which is not good for most of our houseplants that we grow indoors. But for Nepenthes, this really reflects the type of habitats that they're used to. So this is actually a good thing. And they also have a lot of tannins. Tannins are kind of like a brown coloration in a substrate. They're common in very peat or boggy habitats. So if you water a lot of cocoa peat, you can see that the water that runs through it turns a little bit brown. Again, this is not suitable for a lot of our houseplants, but for species that are used to bogs and things like that, cocoa peat actually emulates this very nicely. So going on from that onto the fertilizer section, obviously do not fertilize these plants. I don't fertilize these plants. If you become more of an expert in these, you can probably dabble in a little bit of very specific fertilization, but you don't want to be providing them with any nitrogen, which is what they get from eating and digesting insects and other animals. So you could technically be fertilizing them with potassium or phosphorus only fertilizer, but to not overcomplicate that, I just don't fertilize them at all. So they are evolved to get their fertilization, get their nutrients from digesting things, which is so cool. I do not feed my Nepenthes plants. Now, some people do advise this, but I have also seen and read that this, if you're kind of doing this by hand, it's very easy to also overfeed them. Like, they are not used to having loads of insects in their pitchers. It might actually be too much. So I actually don't feed them at all, which is surprising in an indoor environment where you'd think that there isn't a lot of bugs going around. But you know what? There are fungus gnats, there's the odd mosquito. I do open the window in here for airflow quite regularly, but I'm very careful to not let any native pollinators like bumblebees or wasps or butterflies or anything like that actually come into the room. So I'll only do it when I'm already in here, and I can monitor that a little bit, because we don't want that to be affecting our native pollinators with a very non-native species. But honestly, they trap my fungus gnats quite well. I'm going to insert some B-roll of what's in the pictures at the moment. I do have a fungus gnat situation going on in this room right now. I don't really do any management for that other than letting my plants dry out a little bit more so that I can break the cycle of the fungus gnats just keep coming. But honestly, having Nepenthes in here does that quite well and does kind of keep the adults down and from flying around and really annoying me when I'm working. Because the Nepenthes ampullaria, which is one of the species the Bloody Mary is hybridized with, does actually eat leaf litter, I'm going to start introducing the odd small little leaf into one of these pitchers on this plant and just see what happens, because that could be quite interesting. I don't know if this essentially carries through to the Bloody Mary or if that was kind of that part of that species was kind of bred out of it. I don't know, but I think it could be no harm to give it a go. As far as humidity goes, these plants live in very high humidity environments, and so this is what they thrive in. Indoors, this can be a bit of an issue. A lot of our houses would have anywhere between 40 and 60% humidity. 40, I would say, is a bit low for these, and maybe 50 could be fine. In my room, in this plant room, it's generally between 60 and 70% all the time. So that they do quite well in that situation. It's never any higher than that normally in here. Like I said, I do open the window and do try to have some airflow in here, but when we have really hot days, it can jump up a little bit, but in general, it's between 60 to 75% all of the time, and it doesn't fluctuate that much. Even in winter, it's probably only drops as low as 50 in here, so that's fine for them. But again, these are quite common and adaptable species. I don't know how the more specific maybe lowland species would do with that variation. They may be harder to give that to, but if you're creating an ideal environment, high humidity is better for these. As far as watering goes, I never fully let these plants dry out. And that was probably my biggest learning curve with these, was finding that nice balance. So when these plants get dry, the water that is in the pitchers kind of gets used up, and then the pitchers start to kind of crisp. And this happened to me quite a bit. So they definitely don't like to be forgotten about at all. They're not very forgiving when it comes to that. The pitchers start to dry up quite quickly, much faster than the leaves, in my opinion. The way that I've dealt with this is I have put them in much bigger pots than I would do any other plant of that size. And that is because I needed much more moisture retention for longer periods of time. Now, when I repotted these plants at the beginning of the year, they did have an adjustment period. They didn't really grow. They didn't seem very happy, but they both have seemed to really thrive in that after a couple of months and are doing really, really well. It's been very easy to keep up with the watering because of this. So what I do with these plants, I do let the tops get a little bit dry. That also helps with the fungus gnat situation if it does get out of control. But I will just stick my finger in. I won't let it fully dry out to the bottom of the pot at all, but maybe halfway down the pot, if it starts to feel quite a bit dry, I will then water them. When I water them all the way through. I will generally run lightly a shower head over them just to rinse everything off, but I will try not to fill up the pitchers too much with water, because this obviously dilutes what's in there, and also because they're hanging up, I don't want them to be spilling out over my stuff. I have spilled the inside of the pitcher stuff on my hands and it hasn't done anything. I'm just putting that out there. I'm not advising you to try that, and I'm not also saying that it is definitely safe. I don't actually fully know what is inside the pitchers of these species, so I don't know, but maybe it's just a sticky type of thing, not necessarily an acid or anything. Just before they need water, the leaves do feel a little bit softer than they normally would. However, I only know that because I've had these plants for a long time and I'm very used to them. So this may be too much of a small detail for somebody to learn on a plant that they've just picked up, but it's something you can keep an eye on. As far as pests goes, I've never had any pests on my plants other than fungus gnats, if you'd even really consider them a pest, because I don't find that they actually do great harm to your plants at all. They just kind of are irritating, and also maybe a sign that you're watering a little bit too frequently. And also fungus gnats, they also eat them, so it's kind of not like a terrible thing in my mind anyway for fungus gnats to be laying eggs in the pots of these. Now, because their roots are kind of generally moist all of the time, they may be susceptible to things like root mealies and things like that, something that will eat the roots from below, because wet conditions really allow pests like that to thrive. I've been very lucky that I haven't gotten anything on these plants, and that's never been an issue for me, but it could be. I also don't buy new plants very often or get new plants, so I'm not constantly introducing things to this environment. But if you are, I would keep an eye on that, and if your plant isn't doing well but you're kind of doing everything else right, do just check the roots and see if this is happening. Now, I have done a bit of research, and if this is happening to you, using a systemic thing is okay to use with these species as well. Now, I have gotten some spotting on the leaves of both of these. Now, when this first started happening, I thought it was just sun stressing, and it still might be that, but it also could be a fungus. Now, this has never been an issue with these. I've never done anything about it. You could use a systemic fungicide for this. I haven't, and because these plants are kind of used to a bit of chaos in their environment, they actually deal with that really well, and it's not on all the leaves. It's only on some of them blah blah blah. I haven't done anything about it, but just a heads up that that could be what that is. I'm not totally sure. It could also be from watering as well. It could be edema and kind of pressure on the leaves from inconsistent watering and things like that, but it's fine. As far as pruning goes with these plants, the only pruning I've ever really done is either cutting off a leaf or cutting off a dead pitcher. So there is a lot of kind of talk out there on whether you should cut off old pitchers or not. I'm a little bit in between. Definitely when I was going through issues with these plants, when like almost all the pitchers were dead and falling off, well, not falling off, but like crisped to the end of time, then I did actually cut these off because they just were kind of annoying me. But now that they're doing quite well, as you can see, there are a couple of pitchers that are drying or dried, fully dried, and I've left them on. So when it's not like the full plant, I'm fine to just leave them there. I do feel that with these plants, maybe leaving them on at least until they are fully crisped is probably a good idea. I haven't seen anybody talk about that, but I think because they get their nutrients from the pitchers, if there's anything still digesting in there, you'd want the plant to be taking all the nutrients it possibly can before cutting it off. I wouldn't cut off a pitcher that is still kind of wet and has a bit of life in it, you know? And I've also had pitchers that have had quite a few things being digested in them, and it has seemed to digest it until the pitcher was fully dry. So if you are cutting them off, I would wait personally until they are fully dry before cutting them off. And when I do cut them off, I'm only cutting off the pitcher. The leaf is still good to go for me. The drying hasn't continued up the leaf, so I've left them on. As far as dried up leaves now that they're doing really well, I kind of just leave them there. I don't have an issue with that. I don't overly kind of clean up these plants. I just kind of leave them be the majority of the time. So just some other general notes on these. I briefly mentioned flowering. They have never flowered for me. I don't know if they ever will. I do know that when these plants get more mature, they tend to actually grow pretty tall because they're trying to get up in the canopy of wherever they are to get more light. The Bloody Mary definitely has gotten a good bit taller, but it hasn't like shot up or anything. But I would imagine that they wouldn't flower until they started becoming much more mature. And you know, with a lot of plants, the indoor environment is not 100% where they want to be, and it's not 100% what they are used to. So flowering, I'm not expecting these to flower at all, but it would be really cool if it did happen. Also, every single leaf that my Nepenthes grows has a pitcher at the end. That has kind of always happened for me, but I have seen that that doesn't always happen for everyone, and this could be an indication that something is wrong. Like I said earlier, if you are fertilizing this plant or you're giving it a substrate that has organic matter, the plant doesn't need to create a pitcher to get nutrients. So take a look at that. And also it could be a sign that humidity is too low for these, because they do need humidity in order to create the pitchers. Just in general, I want to say that I absolutely love these plants in my collection. I just adore them. I have never been like super good at growing carnivorous plants apart from these, and they have done the best. That's why I feel like I can actually make a care tips video on them, because I just get so much enjoyment out of them. I think they're fascinating. I think they are kind of scary and weird. If you didn't know, they have amazing ecological relationships in the wild between what they eat, but also other animals that kind of utilize their trapping abilities, like tree frogs hide in them sometimes so that they can also get the flies that are coming in. They're just truly amazing to me. And like the carnivorous and pitcher element of these is just so different to the other houseplants that we grow. That just makes it so exciting. I love looking in them and seeing, you know, do they catch anything? How are they doing? And yeah, I've truly enjoyed growing them a lot, and it is also something that I want to continue kind of developing a little bit. Now that I kind of understand these plants a lot more and they're doing a bit better, I would really like to get a couple of different species. I probably will keep to the highland species because I know my climate and I know that there will be fluctuations. I don't think the lowland species would work for me unless I was doing a very specific and controlled environment like a terrarium or something. But I would like to get a couple more and see how it does. I might even plant them in the same pot. On top of that, I really want to get kind of a moss layer to cover the top of these plants because they do have quite bare sections on them because I just let them grow and do whatever they want. So yeah, but also doing that as well has allowed some of the smaller pitchers on the probably mirabilis one to kind of grow laterally a little bit, so we'll see. But moss could be a really nice and natural addition to these. So that is it for my Nepenthes care tips. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope this provided you with some information on the genus and also kind of how to care for the more common ones in an environment that may be similar to mine. Thank you so much to my lovely patrons for supporting me this month. In the species tier we have Grace and Siobhan. In the genus tier we have Amy, a fellow Amy. And in the family tier we have Michael. Thank you all so much for supporting me. If you want to check out my Patreon, it's patreon.com/Amy Adwan, and it is linked in the description of this video. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you very soon in the next one. Bye.